Hi, welcome to part 1 of 6 of Halloween FX, the series focusing on how Halloween impacts our brain in fun and important ways, informative ways, especially when we're young, also when we're older, also when we're in between. In 1999, I was in between, and I saw a movie called The Blair Witch Project, and it was a major moment. You may remember in the last video, I actually made a major moment when I sort of used a green snake to point to something that was far on the board there. We've since come up with a better solution. It's a basic neuroscience protocol for what we'll call flotation or levitation. I'll get into that in another video. For right now, though, let's just start by talking about the Blair Witch Project and the major moment that Eduardo Sanchez, one of the co-writers and directors of the movie, engineered in 1999 that had a butterfly effect, at least on me, insofar as it made me want to use neuroscience and psychology and things like that to influence and impact in a positive way broad swaths of the population, which is the purpose of this channel and my work in general and everything I'm doing. Well, the particular thing that we want to get at here is faster learning. And that happens when neuroplasticity is engaged or induced. And neuroplasticity is a chemical state, as we've discussed, which is described here. We're going to work sort of backwards like we oftentimes do. And say that we want to achieve this effect. These are the components of the recipe, and this is usually very chemical and very technical. This is the formula 1, 2, 3, 4 things that you may recognize from the previous video, the overview video of the 6 effects, with this being the first. And then the menu, I call it sort of like the ingredients, what the director in this case, or the chef, as I call it, had to work with. In this case, we're focused on Halloween. This second box right here, though, this can really be anything. This could be sports, or it could be academics. It could be anything you wanted to plug in, and you can use this 1, 2, 3, 4, or I can use it as a way to frame an understanding of what we want to achieve in the brain, how it really happens inside the brain, what we're working with, and who is involved. He co-wrote and directed Blair Witch in '99, had an influence on me. He demonstrated immense competence and innovation in the way they brought it together and the way that it impacted brains. Realism. In this case, the actors for this film, one of whom I have met, apparently didn't actually know where they were. They didn't have food. The directors, meaning Sanchez and his co-director, they let them experience those experiences so the film could be as realistic as it was. Next is suspense, of course, jump scares, these twists. These are normal things. The social engineering aspect of this film, though, was really where they set it apart by having people see it on the internet and then tell people about it word of mouth. And the crazy thing is we were telling people it's real. This is a picture of the scene where the actors in this movie, the Blair Witch Project, might lose a map, and they're by a creek, and that really happened. I think they really legitimately lost the map and were just as angry as it appeared in the movie. The next thing I wanted to show you here is that the prefrontal cortex, this part that we always draw in the brain in blue, it's bigger when a primate has a higher social relevance for their existence. So to the extent that the primate group has more and more sociality, the prefrontal cortex is bigger. The reason that we go to movies and then talk about them afterwards, maybe over a fire or whatever, is we are social, and they help us to further develop our uniqueness as humans, really, among the primates. Our reward circuits love surprises. This is a representation of a jackpot. This is the famous fight or flight or freeze. This is a wolverine or a bird or a frozen deer in the headlights. And then the recipe here for the actual what's happening in the brain, the neuroplasticity, the reason that this happens is this stuff and the way that he put it together. But after this brew does its thing, then the effects are faster learning. And we're going to get right into that. And there's a big distinction made here between under and over 25 years of age, because when you're under 25 years of age, your brain is inherently plastic. It doesn't need as much of a purposeful induction. Over, yeah, you need either a major moment or some other of the induction techniques that I'm going to elaborate a lot more on throughout the course of this YouTube channel. But for right now, I'll just remind you that the neuroplasticity brew, the chemicals that are swimming in your brain, say on 9/11 or any other major moment that you've experienced, the reason you remember 9/11 and not 9/10 is those chemicals. How do you recreate those chemicals? What are those chemicals? I call it the magic memory mix. This is a bit of a review from our overarching 30-minute video, which covers all of this. But just quickly, The three chemicals are norepinephrine for alertness and awareness. This is the same chemical as adrenaline, but in the brain it's called norepinephrine. If you're half asleep, you're not going to learn anything. Dopamine is a neurochemical that is implicated in motivation as much as a pleasure and things like that, but it's got a lot to do with wanting to do things and caring. And then finally, acetylcholine, and specifically acetylcholine from two particular parts of the brain, the brain stem and the basal forebrain. Is important that both come. These little symbols right here represent the magic memory mix, which floods the brain. And when it shines on certain neurons that are firing, it attaches molecular acetylcholine molecules there, and it shines like a spotlight on the neurons that we want to induce to grow and make better connections. And then when you go to sleep at night, like this little guy, that's when learning happens in your REM sleep. We'll talk more about that in other videos. Some other chemicals just to be aware of. You've all heard of serotonin, cortisol. There's good and bad aspects of that. You don't want to be super stressed. You won't learn. But there's good stress that is implicated in learning. And oxytocin. And Dr. Paul Zak, my buddy and partner that I tell you about in these videos a lot, maybe he'll do one for us or with us. He is actually, I believe, the world's top expert on oxytocin. He spent pretty much his whole life and career learning about that and a bunch of other things related to neuroscience and chemicals and the way that the brain can be read through the cranial nerve. So here's a baseline, and it's under this line. These are the basic things you need to do to have your brain be ready for faster learning, the induction of neuroplasticity. Video 2 is how to stamp down the learning. But this is video 1 about the induction. So in order to induce neuroplasticity, here's the basics. Keep your stress under control. If you're totally cortisoled out, that's going to be a problem. Again, hydration. Again, inebriation. Cross that out. This is new. We didn't talk about this before, and I'll probably do a little more on it in another video. Circadian rhythm is very obviously out there in the world of pop science. It's got to do with what light comes into your eyes when you sleep, when you rest, how your body sort of resets itself every day. And there's definitely things you can do that are good for the neuroscience. This is the WebMD on his little computer in the background there. And lastly, I want to talk about brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is called BDNF. And this stuff comes out when you exercise in the brain. It is very helpful for long-term potentiation. Another nerd word that we'll get into in another video. It is covered in a little bit detail in the 30-minute overview of the brain video called Learn Faster and Smarter Instead of Slower and Dumber. You may remember in the last video, I actually made a major moment when I sort of used a green snake to point to something that was far on the board there. We've since come up with a better solution. It's a basic neuroscience protocol for what we'll call flotation or levitation.
Learn faster and smarter instead of slower and dumber now. And also watch the rest of this series and like it.